Welcome to Excel Basics video number 19. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about the sum ifs, count ifs, average ifs, min ifs, and max ifs functions to make calculations with one or more conditions or criteria. Now, we've already seen 4 examples of how to use sum ifs and count ifs for adding and counting with a single condition. But in this video, we want to learn about what an AND logical test is. And we'll see that when we're adding or counting or averaging or finding the min or max with 2 or more conditions, we're actually running an AND logical test. Now, here are our 10 awesome examples. Here are some previews of 3 of the amazing functions: count ifs, sum ifs, and average ifs. We'll definitely learn what an AND logical test is. And our last 3 examples will have this awesome data set from an assembly line where we're analyzing the time it takes each person on the assembly line to complete their task. Now, before we learn about an AND logical test and how to use all of these functions here, I want to review the 4 different times already we've seen sum ifs and count ifs functions. I want to go over to the sheet video 3. Now, in video number 3, we saw count ifs and sum ifs. And we saw that count ifs can count with a single condition. We were with F2, that count ifs, counting how many times we found GG. That's the condition or criteria in that column. We also saw down here, F2, how to use the sum ifs to add not all of the numbers, but just some of the numbers based on the condition GG that we had to match in this column. Then in video number 4, we saw how to create this regional sales report using F2, the sum ifs function. We also compared and contrasted sum ifs with a pivot table. And we noted that the difference between using sum ifs and a pivot table, sum ifs function is a little bit harder to create than using the pivot table feature. But the advantage to formulas is that when the source data changes, our formulas instantly update. Now, pivot tables, it's not hard to update. We simply have to refresh it. Then we saw something similar in video number 12. We created a count report counting how many of each product we sold, and we used the count ifs function. And then in video 18, we created a sales rep sales report. And in this video, we used define names to lock our ranges and copy the formula down using sum ifs. Now, if we go over to the sheet more, so we saw 4 videos already, but in this video, we want to see these 5 functions and how to use them for one or more conditions for adding, counting, averaging, finding the max, and finding the min. Now, before we do anything, we need to go over to the sheet and talk about an AND logical test. An AND logical test means we have 2 or more logical tests, and all tests must come out true. Now, you can think of it as, and you can think of asking your kid this, right? If you take out the garbage and clean the table, you get dessert. Or maybe we remember our parents asking us to do those things in order to get dessert. Well, this is an AND logical test, because only if you get 2 truths, took out the garbage and clean the table, do you get dessert. So we all know what an AND logical test is. Here's another example we can all relate to easily. If our goal was to count how many business classes you had with a grade of 3 or higher, we would look through this data set and count on our fingers. Now, that means that the AND logical test is the department field must contain business, and the grade field must contain a number that's greater than or equal to 3. So we would have to, with our conditions or criteria, go through each record and ask 1, 2 questions. These are logical tests. The first record is right here. I have to go to the department field and ask, is that equal to business? That's false. Then I have to go to the grade field and ask, is that grade right there greater than or equal to 3? False. So in this case, I would get false, false. 2 falses. That means I do not count it. The second record, here, I have to go to the department field and ask the question, is that equal to business? That's true. Then I go over to the grade column and ask, is that number greater than or equal to 3? That's false. So in that case, we got true and false. Even though we got 1 true, it does not count because it doesn't pass our AND logical test of getting 2 truths. The next record, we ask the question, is com equal to business? False. Is 3.1 greater than or equal to 3? True. Notice that gives us a false and a true, but that still doesn't count. It's not until we get to a record where we get 2 truths. Is business in the department field equal to business? True. Is the grade in the grade column greater than or equal to 3? True. True, true. Boom, there's our AND logical test being passed. So that means we get to count. So AND logical tests. All the functions we see when we have 2 or more conditions will be following the AND logical test rule. Now let's go look at our first example on the sheet EX1. Now here's our data set. We have quarter, year, department, class number, credits, and grade. And our goal is to count how many business classes you had with a grade of 3 or higher. And we want to have the ability to change the criteria and have the formulas instantly update. That, of course, means we need to follow Excel's golden rule. Because our 2 conditions and criteria can change, and we're going to use them in our formula, we have to put them in the cells and be sure to label them. Now, our AND logical test means that the department field must contain business and the grade field must contain a number that's greater than or equal to 3. Now notice we put greater than or equal to 3 right in the cell. We typed it out. I literally went greater than, equal 3. And when I hit enter, all of those characters are together in the cell. And COUNTIFs will know to compare each one of the numbers to that hurdle. Only when, and notice the bigger side is pointing over towards the column. So it's only when one of these numbers is bigger than or equal to the 3 will we get a true. Now we're going to use COUNTIFs. And we've seen how to use COUNTIFs, but only with criteria range 1 and criteria 1. That meant we had only 1 condition. So this would be the first time we've had 2 conditions. Now, we have the choice here. We can choose to compare business to the department column first, or we can choose the grade hurdle and compare it to the grade column. It does not matter which column you put in first. The order of the columns doesn't matter, because all that matters for an AND logical test is that there are 2 truths. Those 2 truths can be in any order. Now I'm going to choose for criteria range 1 to put department in. I simply highlight the entire column. Now I type a comma. Because I selected department, I have to make sure, remember that was criteria range 1. Criteria 1 has to be the actual department I'm looking for. All right, you ready? Comma. And criteria range 2, that's the second column I need to look through. So I highlight the entire grade. And make sure you highlight the same size. If you accidentally highlighted not enough rows, it would not work. Both of these ranges have to be exactly the same dimension or the same size. All right, that's criteria range 2, comma. Now criteria 2, that's the grade hurdle. And that's our formula. If I close parentheses, I have very carefully red the screen tip. Criteria range 1 is matched up with criteria 1. Criteria range 2 is matched up with criteria 2. Now COUNTIFs will do the rest. Only when it sees true, true will it actually count. So when I hit enter, there's our count of 8. Now the great thing about this, of course, is now I can change this. I can come up and put it in edit mode and type 0.5. Now my condition or hurdle for the grade is the grade has to be greater than or equal to 3.5. When I hit enter, I get exactly a count of 3. Control Z. If I change this to math and enter, I would get exactly a count of 1. Now, one thing about Excel is notice these are all capital. If I type BUSN, all capital, of course it works. But if I type BUSN, Excel and Access doesn't care about case. So BUSN, whatever the letters, capital or not, will be matched up with any other BUSN, capital or not. So Excel formulas are not case sensitive. All right, so we saw how to use COUNTIFs to count with 2 conditions or criteria. Now, one thing about this example is that this is an example where using COUNTIFs would be easier than trying to use a pivot table. And the reason why, and you can read that there, is because of that comparative operator. Anytime we have a comparative operator, that's really hard to do in a pivot table. Much easier to do with COUNTIFs. All right, I'm going to hit enter. Now let's go look at our next example, example 2. Now we have the same data set as we did in our last example, but our goal here is not to count, but to add total credits for business classes in the year 2017. The AND logical test is the department field must contain business and the year field must contain 2017. Now, our column that we're going to make a calculation upon is credit. So for some ifs, we're going to need to highlight the credits to add. But then we have 2 columns where our conditions come from, department and year. All right, so we're following Excel golden rule. Business 2017, those are our criteria. Total credits equals sum ifs. Now the sum range, that is the range where we put our numbers. So we don't want to add all of the credits, but just some of them. Sum range. Now I type a comma. Criteria range 1, it doesn't matter if we choose department or year. I'm going to start with year. So I'm highlighting the entire year column. Criteria range 1. Now I type a comma, and I have to match up the criteria for year and put that into criteria 1. Now I type a comma. Criteria range 2, that's our department column. Comma. Criteria 2, that's going to be our department. So now, close parentheses. And as we look through sum ifs, there's the numbers to add. Year column, year criteria. Department column, department criteria. When I hit enter, total of 25 credits for business classes in the year 2017. If I change this to 2016 and hit enter, 38 credits. All right, I'm going to Control Z. All right, let's go look at example number 3. Same data set, but our goal is to average grades for business classes in the year 2017. So really what we want is we want to calculate our GPA, but only when the department is business and the year is 2017. There are our criteria or conditions. And instead of COUNTIFs or sum ifs, we're going to use average ifs for the first time, tab. Now, instead of saying sum range, it's polite. It says average range. That's where the numbers go. So I'm going to highlight your grades, comma. Now the rest of it's the same. We put criteria range 1, criteria 1, criteria range 2, and so on. Criteria range 1, I can pick either one. I'm picking department this time. Highlight the whole column, comma. Criteria 1, there's the business, condition or criteria, comma. Criteria range 2, that's got to be the year column, comma. And there's the year for criteria 2. Close parentheses. Now instead of taking all the numbers and adding them, it'll add them and divide by the count. And your GPA for business classes in the year 2017, that means we're making an average calculation with 2 conditions, 2.68. Now if I change this to 2016, your GPA in that year for business departments was 2.95. Control Z. So we can definitely average, sum, and count with 2 conditions or criteria. Now we're going to go over to example 4 and see a new data set. Our new data set, we have date, year, product, sales for a given transaction, and the cost of goods sold. So Quad was sold on 7/15 in the year 2018. The total sales, 24,053 and 52 pennies, and cost of goods sold, 1,128 and 60 cents. Our goal for this example is to add total cost of goods sold, that's our expense for each one of the sales, for Quad product in the year 2017. Now let's come down here, total cost of goods sold. Well, we're adding, so we use sum ifs. Sum range, that's the entire column. Now, click in the top cell. I'm using Control-Shift down arrow to highlight all the way down and Control backspace to jump back to the active cell, comma. Criteria range, I can pick either one. I'm picking year first. Control-Shift down arrow, Control backspace. Since that's the year column, I comma and click on year, comma. Criteria range 2, product. Control-Shift down arrow, Control backspace, comma. And we're going to select our product. Now I'm going to close parentheses and enter. Our total, 35,310 and 97 pennies. We're adding with 2 conditions or criteria. I can totally come over and change this. When I type sunset, instantly I get sunset cost of goods sold total for the year 2017. Now, I'm going to use my scroll arrows, and we're going to go over to example number 5, same exact data set. And our goal is to add total sales for each product in the year 2017. That means we're going to create our sum ifs because we're adding and copy the formula down. Each one of the product conditions or criteria will be a relative cell reference as we copy down. But inside our sum ifs, when we look at the year column, we're going to have to lock our criteria. All right, we're going to click in cell H14 equals sum ifs. Sum range, we're adding sales. Click in the top cell. Control-Shift down arrow, F4, because we need to lock that range, comma. Criteria range, I have 2. I can pick in any order. I'm going to pick year first. Control-Shift down arrow, F4. We've locked our criteria range 1, comma. Year criteria, 2017. Every cell needs 2017, so I have to hit the F4 key, comma. Criteria range 2, I need the product column. Control-Shift down arrow, F4 to lock it. I love that F4. It locks it, and it jumps the screen back up, comma. And I'm going to use left arrow to get relative cell reference for my product criteria. We're using sum ifs to add total sales with 2 conditions, where one of the conditions, the year is locked for criteria 1, and for criteria 2, the product is not. Control-Enter. Double-click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. I'm verifying that all the cell references are in the right place. Now, this is an example of a report that we want to create that would be easier to create with a pivot table. Now, we've seen a bunch of pivot tables in earlier videos. In our next video, we'll see a lot more pivot tables. So I'm not going to create that pivot table. But if you ever had a situation where the actual source data is changing and you wanted your formulas to instantly update, then formulas would have the advantage. We still are able to change this, and it will update instantly when I change this to 2016. Now, actually, in our next video, I mentioned the pivot tables. We'll see how to do something similar to this using slicers. I'm going to Control Z. All right, let's go look at example 6. This is our last example for this data set. And our goal here is to count the number of sales that are greater than 2,000 for each product in the year 2017. That means 1, 2, 3 conditions or criteria. Our full logical test is the year field must contain 2017, and the sales field must contain a number greater than 2,000, and the product field must contain the given product name. Now, we're going to count here, and we have 3 columns we have to look through. There's the year, because we're looking for 2017. The product is going to be a relative cell reference, and we have to look through that column. But look at this. We're going to have to look through the sales. We're counting only the sales that are greater than our hurdle of 2,000. Now, notice there's no equal sign, so of course, 2,000's not included in our count. And the bigger side of our greater than symbol is pointing to the sales column. So we're going to only count numbers that are greater than 2,000. All right, let's see how to do this. Equals count ifs. Criteria range 1, we're actually going to have criteria range 1 and criteria 1. We're going to have to repeat it 3 times. All right, and it doesn't matter in which order we do this. Criteria range 1, I'm choosing the sales category first. So I click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow F4, because I'm going to lock that, comma. There's the hurdle, and that hurdle has to be locked. So I hit the F4 key, comma, criteria range 2. I'm choosing year. Click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow F4 to lock it, comma, criteria 2, that's the year. And I'm definitely hitting the F4 key to lock it, comma. Criteria range 3. Wow, this is the 3rd criteria range. Definitely selecting the product column, Control Shift down arrow F4. Now I have to type a comma to get to criteria 3, and that's going to be either clicking or left arrow to get relative cell reference product. So we're counting with 3 conditions or criteria. There's the sales column and the sales criteria. Year column, year criteria. Product column, and as a relative cell reference, the product criteria. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. The cell references and ranges are looking good. Now I can change this. I can come up here and type greater than 2,200. Wow. So we had in the year 2017 only 2 quad sales amount greater than 2,200. How about 16? Let's try the year 2016. Wow, 8, 14, 8, and 4. So we built our report, and we're allowed to change our criteria. Now, that alone is enough for us to decide to use COUNTIF rather than a pivot table. But again, this is an example where we're using a comparative operator. And although it's possible to create a helper column, and there's a few other ways we can do it, it's much more difficult with a pivot table. Much easier to simply create this, copy this down. All right, let's go look at our next example, EX7. Now, our goal here from this data set is to add sales for each product automatically with the SUMIFS and Excel table feature. Now, these are your sales. And each day, you enter 4 records for each one of the products. We're going to enter our sales and cost of goods sold. And we want our report to automatically update. Well, we're going to use SUMIFs, and we're going to use just a single condition or criteria, but we're going to use SUMIFs in conjunction with the table feature. Now, SUMRange, we want to add sales. So we can highlight this, but remember, since this has already been converted to an Excel table, you can simply hover your cursor at the top of the field, and when you see your downward pointing arrow, you can click, and it puts the table name and then in square brackets the field name. And the great thing is that range is locked when we copy it down. Comma, criteria range, product. I'm going to do the same thing, click at the top with my black downward pointing arrow. There it is, my sales, field name in square brackets, product, comma, left arrow, and that will do it. Close parentheses. We're adding with a single condition. Control, Enter, double click, and send it down. When we come to the last cell and hit F2, oh, that's so nice. The table formula nomenclature is totally locked when we copy the formula down. Now watch this. We're going to learn another great trick for the table feature. I'm going to highlight 4 cells. And we saw earlier that if we put anything into the active cell and use Control Enter, it'll populate it into all cells. So I want to put the next date, 11/16/2017. And now when I use Control Enter, not only does it put those dates into the cell, but it adds 4 new rows to our Excel table. Now I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy and paste because it's the same 4 products each day. Control-C, Control-V. And now I'm going to enter my numbers. And before I enter this last one, you can just watch up here how Yanaki will automatically update. So before I hit Tab, we're looking at Yanaki, and instantly everything is updating. So we're entering 4 records each day with our sales and cost of goods sold, and we wanted a report using SUMIFs to add with one condition or criteria. And of course, the Excel table feature, you can see totally the columns are expanding. All right, I'm going to click Escape. Now I'm going to use my scroll arrow over here to expose some more sheets. And we've got to go look at example 8, 9, and 10. Now, this data set right here is based on an assembly line. Here's a picture. There's position or post 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. There's 12 different positions. And for each one of these positions, you're required to complete your task in 10 seconds. So over here, we have a data set that tracks. There's 1 through 12 and each one of their times. Then it repeats 1 through 12 and each one of their times. So if we control down arrow, so we have 589 records here. Control Home, the post column, and then the seconds column. Our goal is to count how many times a post, that means one of these positions here, fell below the required 10 seconds assembly time, which is required. So our AND logical test will be the post has to equal the given post. That just means as we're copying it down, we're going to look at the relative cell reference and compare it to that column. And seconds have to be less than 10. So we're counting how many times in this column for each individual post were below 10. The higher, the better, because above 10 means you're going slow. Equals count ifs. Criteria range, it doesn't matter which one of the columns we do first. I'm going to choose post. Click in the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, F4 to lock it. Comma, criteria, that's a relative cell reference. Comma, criteria range 2, that's the time column. Control Shift down arrow, F4. Comma, criteria 2, less than 10. So now it will count less than 10 for each one of the posts. I need to lock that with the F4 key. Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Oh, well, position 7 and 11, it looks like they do not have very many times below the 10-second required time. We can see this person has 45. There's a 48 here. Now, I'm going to click in the last cell in F2 just to make sure the cell references are fine. this is important. We're counting. We know these two people we have to go and help and train better. But what if we wanted not just to count or add or average? What if we wanted to find out the minimum time for each one of our posts or the maximum time? Like, I'm curious, what's the max time for post 11 and 7? Now, we're going to go over to sheet EX9 and 10, and I'm actually going to show you min ifs and max ifs. These are new functions in Office 365 for Excel 2016. What that means is you not only have Office 365, but you have the version that automatically updates every month with new features. Now, I'm teaching this class at Highline, and even in our labs, we don't have the right version for this. But in case some of you do, because some of you might have it on your computer, most of the time when we're buying the latest Office, we're now buying the Office 365. So I'm going to show you these two functions. It's not going to be on a test or required. But let's go ahead and see how these work. Equals min, and sure enough, look at that. There's a min if. So I'm going to down arrow and then tab. And it's exactly the same as average ifs and sum ifs. There's the range that needs the numbers, criteria range 1, criteria 1. So I'm going to, for the min range, select the times. And this is an Excel table. So because it's a large column, I'm going to take advantage of clicking with my black arrow above the field. And sure enough, it puts the table name and then the field name in square brackets, comma, criteria range. I'm clicking on post. There it is, table and field name, comma. And then there is the condition or criteria. All we're doing is we're looking through this column to find the ones, and the min will pick out the smallest time from whatever the times are in the seconds column. Close parentheses. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. We can see the table formula nomenclature, or for that matter, a couple videos ago, we saw define names. They're awesome because they're locked as we copy down. And of course, the advantage to tables and table formula nomenclature is that if we add new records to this, it'll totally update. Now, let's see. We're looking through, and 7 and 11. The min time they have is 9. Everybody else is in the 7-second range. All right, let's look at the max. Equals max ifs. Max range, I'm clicking on the top with my down arrow. Comma, criteria range, I'm clicking on the post column. I love that. It makes it so easy. Comma, and then the criteria range is the post. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Double click and send it down. I'm going to the last cell and hitting F2 to verify that all of the ranges are in the correct place. And they are. So it looks like everybody, most everybody is in the 10s. Wow. So there's a max 12, even though 12 had a pretty low min, 11. And 11 post and 7 definitely have the biggest amongst all of them. All right, now there are some homework problems over here. So there's 3 homework problems for you to practice, including the answers. And in this video, we saw a lot about making calculations with conditions or criteria. We saw how to use max ifs. Most of us don't have that function yet, but either get Office 365 or the next version will have it. Min ifs. Over here on 8, we saw how to use count ifs to count how many times a particular post was below the required 10-second limit. Over on 7, we saw how to use the Excel table feature and sum ifs so we could add records and have our report update automatically. Over on 6, we saw how to do count ifs with 3 conditions or criteria. On example 5, we saw how to use the sum ifs with a relative and absolute cell reference. Over on example 4, we saw how to use sum ifs to add cost of goods sold with 2 conditions or criteria. Example 3, we saw the average ifs function, averaging some numbers with 2 conditions or criteria. Example 2, F2, we saw sum ifs with 2 conditions or criteria. And in example one, started it all off using COUNTIFs. If you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. And in our next Excel basic number 20, we'll talk more about pivot tables. All right, we'll see you next video.